Okay, we're going to get started here. This is a Creativity Dream Workshop, and my name is Elizabeth Abear. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story in a little bit. But first, I did promise you what's in store was to learn about what is creativity and how does it impact your life. I'm going to share how the mind works and why we develop fears. How our fears, beliefs, and habits are preventing us from living the life that we want. And also, I would like to share with you how to conquer overwhelm because I don't know about you, but I have often been in overwhelm. And I've learned some techniques to help with that. So, next, I would like for you to think about what is your definition of creativity. Because a lot of people think that creativity has to involve the arts. My definition of creativity is that it's an expression, and everyone expresses themselves differently. So, creativity to me is just utilizing a unique approach to solve a challenge. People who can cook and design beautiful meals or beautiful plates, that's using their creativity. There are gardeners that are so creative, um, floral design, even accountants, they can create spreadsheets because they're good with numbers. Now, also, a lot of people feel that they are not born with creativity or they didn't inherit enough creativity. Now, genes only influence 30% of your creative ability. So the rest of it, the 70%, it can be learned and developed. So I'm going to tell you about the little girl who could. When I was 8 years old, I didn't feel like I had any barriers. And I wrote this story because nobody told me I couldn't. And I had this idea and I just went for it. Now, my father was an artist. And so he decided to illustrate it and we put it together in book form. And it was very exciting. It was a lot of fun. And I was so excited I was going to write book number 2. But something that my father said to me shut me down. And I never wrote that second book. I had forgotten all about that memory. But what happened was I procrastinated for 30 years. I would start stories, I would start writing these great stories, but I couldn't finish them. I would just get to a point and they were unfinished. And I really thought there must be something wrong with me. Why can I start all these stories, but I can't finish them? It got to the point where I stopped telling people that I would write stories because people would always ask, well, what have you written? And then I'd have to say, well, I haven't really finished anything. I wrote this book when I was 8, but I haven't really done anything since. So I felt kind of ashamed. And that was my background on procrastination. So I've probably got a lot of people beat as far as the number of years you procrastinated. Now, I want to tell you, when did I decide to change my procrastination programming? You see, nothing in my life had turned out how I had planned or how I had imagined. I had lost 2 siblings to cancer, and they were both young. They were both in their 40s. After 18 years of marriage, my husband left and we divorced. And this was something I never imagined. I mean, I always imagined myself married, you know. I was, one of those that would joke, thank God I don't have to date anymore, etc. And we divorced. And then it was just a couple months later that my mother passed away. So there was still a lot of sadness going on in my life. And I got really well, how should I say it? I was very concerned with my legacy. Like, I didn't want to die with stories still inside me. And I felt like I did have stories inside me. And I felt like some of these stories could help other people. And I realized that with two siblings that died early, I mean, there was no guarantee that how long I was going to be around. So I decided that I needed to change. And that's often the case when we finally decide to shift. There's something really meaningful to that person that makes them decide to make that now is the time to change. Now, I didn't have a whole lot of help changing. I had to do a lot of the research on my own. So I'm assuming that you want to understand why you procrastinate, or maybe you have unfinished tasks, or maybe you're overwhelmed. Maybe you just want to understand creativity a little bit better. So let's start with procrastination. Why do we procrastinate? Okay, so let's talk about the conversations in your head. Now, usually we say that if you're talking to yourself, you're mentally unstable, but that is untrue because we all talk to ourselves. We all have conversations in our head. However, a lot of our conversations we don't even hear anymore. They're just like kind of muted in the background. So, can you hear yours? Do you even know what you're saying to yourself? Because are you really in charge? Who's in charge? The conscious mind or your subconscious mind? And I'm going to tell you that there are a lot of conversations that are going on that once you're aware of it, you can be more, once you're aware that they are happening, then you can pause and start to listen for them. So let's talk about who's in charge. Now, the conscious mind is the part of your mind that analyzes, it criticizes, it thinks logically, and it's where you put most of your attention. Now, the unconscious mind controls most of our bodily functions. It's responsible for storing our memories, and it makes meanings from those memories. A lot of times we have people in the same families who have experienced the same event, but they will take drastically different meanings from them. And you see that a lot of times too with twins, that they're, excuse me, the meanings that they make from a particular event are vastly different. So that's what happens in our unconscious mind. Now, the unconscious mind is always listening. Sometimes we call it the subconscious mind. So if you're not running your subconscious, it's going to run you. And that's what happens with a lot of our habits and our beliefs. We've stopped thinking about them, and they are running our lives. So here's the rules of the mind. Your mind does what it thinks you want it to do. And it does what it believes is in your best interest. So your mind will attempt to keep you from pain. And your mind loves the familiar. Now let's go over that again. So your mind does what it thinks you want it to do. What does it think you want it to do? When you're procrastinating and you say, well, I want to, let's say, write a book, but you're procrastinating, it's because you also told your mind that you didn't want to sit still, or you thought the research was boring, or you didn't want to be isolated, or you didn't think you were good enough. There could be a number of things that you told your mind. And so your mind says, well, I'm going to protect you from that because that's my job, to keep you away from pain. And if you think you're not good enough and you're going to be ridiculed when this book comes out, well, we'll just stop that right now and I'll prevent you from writing it. Now, this happens in other scenarios as well. Let's say you don't like your job or you have let's say when you were a small child, you got up to read in front of the class and you mispronounced some words and you were laughed at. And you're thinking to yourself, and let's say a 9-year-old mind says, I'm never going to get up in front of people and read again. But now you're grown and you have to do a report at work and you get up there and you cannot do it, or you get sick. Your mind can make you sick to prevent you from doing this because it's saying, remember how painful that was? I'm going to keep you from that pain. And that's the kind of function that your mind has. So it's trying to help you. The other thing is your mind loves the familiar. So if you've been doing something a certain way for a number of years, your mind likes that because it's familiar. Back in the tribal days, you were ridiculed if you were different. So we construct a lot of these fears from our childhood based on some of those things that happened. Maybe you were bullied or ridiculed or told that you were stupid or ugly or whatever. We remember that. And the little child self made decisions based on that awareness. And like me, I was only on this earth for 8 years. What kind of experience did I have? But I still made a judgment based on that. So now you grow up and your awareness has matured and you think that your beliefs have, but they haven't. They're still back there. And so we need to uncover that because the mind will cling to these beliefs because it's familiar, because you've never learned to change it. And if you go back and remember the first time you were afraid, you might still feel those feelings. What does that say? Your mind is remembering. So I told you about when I said enough is enough, but it was over 30 years. So those fears inside of me kept me stuck. And like I said, fears were originally constructed to keep us safe. And the subconscious generally doesn't like the unknown. It likes the familiar. You're going to hear that again. Because at one point in the tribal, we're shamed and outcast for being different. That is scary to the mind. The subconscious mind doesn't want to be an outcast. They don't want that shame. That's pain. So what are they going to do? The mind is going to move you away from pain. That's its job. I'm going to keep you from having pain. So even if you tell your mind something, for instance, you'd be surprised what kinds of conversations go on. You might be the person who says, oh, I can't even look at a piece of chocolate cake without gaining weight. Your mind's going, oh, really? Oh, we have to gain weight? Oh, okay, I'll do that. You are giving your mind instructions, you don't even realize it. So you need to be aware of the language that you tell your mind. So I want to tell you that you should not be afraid to fail, but be afraid not to try, because our fears are here to teach us something about ourselves. So if your fear is about being ridiculed, you just know that that was a pain that you don't want to repeat. And you can change the way you look at that. So when we're young and toddlers, we don't have a care to shape of our bodies. We can run around naked, we're free, right? As we grow, we start to compare ourselves with others. And as that happens, we start to hide parts of ourselves. We start to hide our gifts because we believe they have little or no value. So Wayne Dyer said, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So what, again, did you say you really wanted in life and work? And are you achieving that? So if your mind does what it thinks you want it to do, if you haven't achieved what you want, or you're not doing what you want, then somewhere you've told your mind that this is what you want. And your mind thinks you want those bad habits and procrastination. And your mind responds to the words you tell it and the pictures you make. So think about that. What words are you telling your mind? And what pictures do you have in your head? That's how your mind responds. Now, I like to say that you need to talk to your mind like you would a little child that you love. And you wouldn't be ridiculing or scolding, you would be praising. So that's what I like to encourage people to do, is to praise yourself every day, because your mind is always listening. So the key is to make what you want familiar to your mind. What is unfamiliar, you want to make familiar to your mind, and to be specific, okay? So if you just want to get through something and you don't care about it, you might be telling your mind, I just want to do this, and your mind will do something crazy. I've known people who have said, I can't take this job anymore. I just need a whole week to relax, to just lay in bed. And guess what? They got the flu and they were in bed, because the mind was very literal. When you say, I need to be in bed for a week, well, it got that, it managed to do that for you. So be very aware of what you're saying to your mind. Now, here's something that you can do to make the unfamiliar familiar. You can pick something that you want to make familiar. Let's say you want to cut down on your sugar intake. And this is a very small thing. It's best to start with something small. So let's say you have sugar in your coffee every morning. And so for 1 week, you're gonna do no sugar in your coffee. And every day you're gonna notice how it's easier and easier and easier. And after like 2 weeks, you'll take some sugar in your coffee and you'll go, oh, that's so sweet. How did I ever drink it like that? Because now the sugarless coffee is what's familiar to you and not the sugar coffee. Or you could do this for getting up earlier in the morning, but pick one task that you would like to do and just notice how your mind is. Now, I'm going to give, and there's another caveat, you may be arguing with yourself. I know sometimes when I started to change something, I would have arguments in my head. And that's okay, because it's unfamiliar and your mind is trying to steer you back to the familiar. And if you're aware of that, then it's good. That's why sometimes habits are difficult to change, because you're having these little arguments. So let's talk a little bit about fears and limiting beliefs, because they do have a purpose. We form our limiting beliefs to protect us from failure. We don't want to fail. And fears are formed to protect us from rejection. One of the biggest fears we have is the fear of not being in control. So if someone's laughing at you or you feel like you're failing at something, then you don't feel like you're in control. Now, here's something to think about. Your thoughts are controlling your feelings, right? And then your feelings are controlling your actions. And then the actions will control an event. So it all starts with the thoughts. So what would happen if you changed those thoughts? Then your feelings would change. And the changed feelings would have a different actions. and then the new actions would have different events. Now, I did study some of the work by Byron Katie, and this is related to some of our beliefs. So it's something that she poses 4 questions to. So anytime you come up with a limiting belief, these are the 4 questions that she poses. The first one is it true? So if you think a certain way about yourself that you can't do something, is that true? And if you say yes, can you absolutely know that it's true? And how do you react, and what happens when you believe that thought? And who would you be without that thought? So we are not our thoughts. And think about how habitual some of our thoughts are, and they're not even true. Now, Joseph Pierce said, to live a creative life, we must lose our fear of being wrong. Where does that fear of being wrong come from? See, that's a thought. But to be creative, you have to be free. And in order to be free, you have to lose that sense of control, which is one of the greatest fears, right? When you are eliciting the creative part of your brain, it involves a degree of freedom, because once it's constrained, it's harder for you to come up with, what did we say creativity was? Expression and utilizing a unique approach to solve a challenge. It's much harder to solve a challenge when you feel controlled or constrained. So that's where that freedom comes in. So ask yourself, what story are you telling yourself? Are you telling yourself you're not very creative? Are you telling yourself you could never do this or never do that, or you can't lose the weight, or you can't finish the book, or you can't whatever? I'm going to tell you that we're naturally creative. We're born that way. And if you ever watch a baby, they're confident and they don't judge themselves. So you watch a baby trying to walk, it's not going to give up on walking because it fell down 20 times one day. It's not going to say, oh, am I really bad at this? Or how do I guess I don't look very good because I'm falling down. No, they don't go in the corner and say, I think I'm just going to crawl the rest of my life. They keep going because they're not concerned. They're not judging themselves that they fell down 20 times in one day. They just keep going. But we develop judgments about ourselves and our abilities. And then we form these distorted beliefs. And the distorted beliefs form habits that counter what we want. So you could go back again to Byron Katie and say, when you have a judgment, is that true? And can you absolutely know that it's true? So think about the stories that you're telling yourself. And remember, your subconscious mind is always listening. You see how this is all kind of playing together? Okay, so this is back to the praise. Talk to yourself like you would someone you love. Because you're creative and you've always been creative. And you have solved so many problems and challenges in your life. And that's exactly what we said. Creativity is expression, and it's utilizing a unique approach to solve a challenge. Okay, let's go back here just for a minute. So when I said praise, I think you should praise yourself every day and make that familiar. Make it so familiar. Most people are so quick to criticize. They might even say something like, oh, I'm always forgetting things. Well, what if you said, I'm always remembering things? Because you remember when you forgot something. If you walk back to the house because you remembered you needed to get something else, but we say, oh, I forgot something. Let's turn it around and be positive. And that's when you'll create more. When you play, you'll create more. George Bernard Shaw said, we don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. So remember that we're all creative in some way. And creating connects us to our true self, because that creative part of us is the unique part of us. We don't know what part we can develop, because everybody has their own dream and yearnings that's part of their essence. I mean, I don't know why I gravitate towards some things and not others, and I'm sure you're the same way. There's certain things that you believe that you're interested in, and other things you have no interest in. That's part of your creative being. Now, the desire to create is thought to be one of the deepest yearnings of the human soul. So let me ask you this. What are you willing to do today to shift your mind and behavior? Now, we can talk a little bit about how creativity impacts your life. So just the mere act of creating de-stresses your brain, because in the act of creating, you're utilizing both hemispheres of the brain. And utilizing both hemispheres of the brain is very similar to meditation. And we've all heard how meditation is good for de-stressing the brain. Some people even get into a kind of a trance state. In fact, the phrase starving artist has nothing to do with money. It has to do with some artists were so much in a trance with their work that they would work through meals and forget to eat. Think about that. Now, creating also helps to access intuition, and it increases your confidence. So that's how it impacts your life. Now we can talk about overwhelm. Now, I think overwhelm equals overthinking. Now, I did talk about being free when you are creating. You need a certain amount of freedom. However, I found that too much freedom can cause overwhelm, because you don't really know what to focus on. And that happens a lot to me when I take on too many projects. Which one should I be working on? Oh, I have to do this, I have to do that. And so by narrowing the focus, we can limit overwhelm. It's that expression, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So you don't think of the big picture, you think of the little chunks that you have. Now, Betty Edwards developed this drawing technique called drawing upside down, because she would bring in pictures of art, and a copy of artwork, and she would have them draw it, and they were all having a difficult time. There was a lot of judgment. There were a lot of thoughts about how it should look. If it was a figure, where's the arm go? This is an arm, this is a leg, So she decided one day to bring it in and put it upside down, and they didn't know what it was. So this piece of artwork was upside down, and it forced a shift in the brain of her students, and it allowed them to draw in the now. So it was really a good technique, and it limited overthinking, and they actually were very successful in drawing it. So I want you to think about that technique when you need to make a shift. Just do something really out of the box, like, do it upside down. Another thing that you can do is, if you're writing, write with your non-dominant hand. There's all kinds of things that just can shift it, but it also limits overthinking. It's important to try to stay pretty much in the now and not think about all the things you need to do, because that's thinking in the future. So what did we learn? We learned how creativity impacts your life, how our fears and beliefs and habits mostly from childhood are preventing you from creating the life you want. Why our fears were created, and we also learned how to conquer overwhelm. And guess what? It all began with a thought. So I hope that you received valuable information. And if you received value here and would like to explore more, you can book a 45-minute free coaching call with me. And we can go over what things we can do to shift your thinking. Remember, it all starts with a thought, and your subconscious